Hello and welcome back to a new series on my channel called Academia and Film, where in each episode I pick a film and explore the ways in which academia is presented. In today's video, I'll be dissecting Nicholas Hittner's film adaptation of Alan Bennett's The History Boys, which, fun fact, is my favorite play ever. The film takes place at a grammar school in Yorkshire, England, set in 1983's Thatcher England. We follow a group of sixth formers who return to school for an extra term to try out for Oxbridge, having received promising exam results. The push to try for the prestigious universities is at the behest of the headmaster, who is tempted by the prestige and boost in the league tables that these Oxbridge scholarships will bring to the school. Trying for history, the headmaster decides to hire a recent Oxbridge graduate called Irwin to give the boys an edge in their entrance exams and interviews. Up until now, the boys have primarily been taught by history teacher Mrs. Lintodd and general studies teacher Hector, whose unorthodox teaching methods the headmaster describes as
unpredictable and unquantifiable.
It would be natural, though incorrect, to assume that Bennett was inspired by his school days and teachers when writing the play. Instead, in the introduction to the play, Bennett states that, at school, he never had a teacher like Hector or Irwin. His own history master was solid and dependable, much like Mrs. Lintodd. What inspired him when molding the characters of Irwin and Hector was a group of well-educated boys from Christ's Hospital, boys whose schools had never been as good as Bennett's. And when they talked of their school days, there was often in the background a master whose sayings they remembered, teachers, who presumably played a part in getting them the scholarships most of them had at Oxford and Cambridge. To Bennett, this just seemed unfair. He had never had such a teacher and had had to make his own way, which may be one of the reasons why he'd been prompted to write such a teacher. Hector and Irwin represent two methods of teaching. Irwin, a more practical approach intended to produce a quantifiable outcome, whereas Hector, a more spontaneous and future-orientated approach that is unable to be quantified. He also subscribes to a more practical and hands-on approach to learning. At the beginning of the film, in an attempt to teach the subjunctive, he has the boys simulate a scene of their choice in the French subjunctive. Of course, being young boys, they decide to simulate a French brothel scene into which Irwin and the headmaster walk into, providing for a comedic scene. Another defining characteristic of Hector's lessons is poetry. Hector has the boys memorize poetry that they are unable to understand or appreciate in the moment, with the justification that if they learn it now, they can refer back to it in the future. This future self-continuity approach to learning is the opposite to the type of superficial, short-term, goal-oriented education that the headmaster believes will get the boys into Oxbridge. Irwin's approach, though successful in giving the boys a nuanced approach to history, is specifically intended to get the boys through the entrance exams. Whereas Hector's teaching methods, as Timms puts it,
Mr. Hector's stuff's not meant for the exam. It's to make us more rounded human beings.
In this way, Irwin invests in their present, whereas Hector in their future. Despite their differences, Hector and Irwin's different teaching methods actually complement each other when used in conjunction. The final essay that Dakin hands into Irwin near the end of the film is about turning points, meaning a time at which a decisive change in a situation occurs, or subjunctive history, as Dakin perfectly puts it. His essay explores the alternative outcome of World War II had Halifax been Prime Minister of England instead of Churchill. Here, Dakin takes Hector's favorite topic, the subjunctive, and uses it to apply an Irwin-esque journalistic twist to the course of history. Since the Oxbridge exams and interviews encourage unique and original thinking, Dakin's essay about Halifax's teeth and what they may have meant for England are the perfect antidote to the dull essays he had been producing at the start of the film when he simply merited good writing to the regurgitation of facts. Dakin's essay also acts as a plot device which bridges together both Hector and Irwin's different teaching methods in a complementary manner. Unlike teachers in most academia movies who seem morally and ethically infallible, think of Dr. McGuire from Good Will Hunting or Mr. Keating from Dead Poets Society. Both Hector and Irwin, though popular with the boys, are morally gray characters who engage and or display sexual advances towards the boys. With regards to Hector's misconduct, we find out pretty early on in the screenplay that Hector drops the boys home on his motorbike every day. We are told very early on in the film that this is so that Hector can molest them. What seems striking about this is just how willing we are to gloss over the abuse. It is the romanticization of academia and the portrayal of the special relationship the boys share with Hector from the offset that enables us to magically justify the gross abuse of power somehow. The boys themselves don't seem to have a problem with this, and have come up with their own comedic ways to cope with it. It is also important to mention that the boys don't see it as abuse, but rather as a small price to pay for the fun they have with Hector in the classroom, with Dakin even going as far as to stop Hector from getting fired when he is found out by a lollipop lady who catches him groping one of the boys on his bike. While Hector's molestation of the boys is detached from any romantic feeling towards them, Irwin's feelings towards Dakin are anything but. In the scene at the end of the film where a confident Dakin reveals his feelings for Irwin, who also nurses feelings for Dakin, is anything but willing to explore things with Dakin, at least at first. This is because Irwin does not want to be a predator like Hector. The power dynamic between Irwin and Dakin in this scene is worth exploring, as unlike previous scenes where Irwin, as the teacher, held the power, it is now Dakin, who no longer Irwin's student, holds the power. This can be seen through Irwin's vulnerability, in the way that he avoids Dakin's gaze, and the way that he retreats to the window to avoid being found out by Dakin. The empty classroom in this shot also provides a stark contrast to the scene in which Irwin teaches his lessons, where the shot is much busier with books, paper, and of course the boys. The strikingly empty classroom also heightens the sexual tension between Irwin and Dakin and alludes to something interesting said by Hector. The transmission of knowledge is itself an erotic act. No more is this sentiment more evident than in the relationship between Irwin and Dakin. It is through Irwin's transmission of knowledge that Dakin becomes more and more eager to impress through his essays and ideas. Take the infamous Nietzsche scene, for example.
I've been reading this book by Nietzsche. Who? Nietzsche. He's a philosopher. Frederick Nietzsche.
I think that's pronounced Nietzsche.
I talked to Irwin about it. He didn't correct me. Let me call him Nietzsche.
And so, if the transmission of knowledge is an erotic act, then the classroom becomes the place where this erotic act takes place. The reason Irwin's relationship with Dakin doesn't seem as predatory as Hector's inappropriate relationship with the boys is due to the similarity in age between Dakin and Irwin. Though we aren't told Dakin's exact age, we can assume that he is in his early to mid-20s, while the boys are between 17 to 18. Architecture and set design is another key theme of academia in films. In the film, the architecture of the prestigious universities is used to focus on both the prestige of the universities, as well as the endless possibilities that a scholarship to Oxbridge would open up for the boys. In the scene where the boys interview for the universities, we see Hector and Posner walk through Christ Church. The camera gives us an overview of the courtyard highlighting the expanse of the city, as well as the endless avenues open to them. Bennett himself felt this same liberation when walking through the University of Cambridge for the first time. He recalled being astounded by the beauty of the place. He remarks that in those days one could just wander at will, go into any chapel or library, so that long after dusk I was still patrolling this enchanting place. The ability to walk at will through the campuses without any restriction is conveyed in the interview scene where the boys stroll through the universities, taking pictures, and taking in the historic surroundings. The way the boys' body language changes when they're interviewing at the universities is also very interesting. While the boys are at school, a surrounding that is familiar to them, they are much more confident in their movements. We find them running to lessons in boyish vigor, sprawling out in chairs during lessons, as well as ditching their blazers for the most part. However, while they're doing their interviews, they keep to themselves physically, keeping their hands in their pockets to avoid taking up too much space, as well as keeping their blazers on. The change in body language highlights their discomfort, as well as their position as small fish in a big pond, which is the opposite of how they are presented back at Yorkshire. Nostalgia is another device upon which academic films are predicated. Nostalgia for a time of youth and friendship. Nostalgia for a time of hope and possibility. Nostalgia for a simpler time before technological advancements took over the classroom, creating an anti-social learning environment. The school itself, with its long corridors and its worn-out tables, a testament to all those who came before, creates a visual nostalgia, a fleeting melancholy for youth. Though Hector's relationship with the boys outside of the classroom is highly inappropriate, the relationship that he forms with the boys inside the classroom through his spontaneous and creative methods of teaching certainly forms a longing for that type of classroom dynamic, especially since most of us remember school as a place where the teacher would stand in front of the classroom and talk at us rather than with us. The movie, therefore, also creates a nostalgia for something that has never existed for most of us. A longing for that type of informal teacher-student relationship. Poetry is another way through which we can explore the theme of nostalgia. In the film, poetry is taught in a very specific and traditional way. That is, through an emphasis on memorization and oration. Consider the scene where Posner recites Drummer Hodge. The memorization of poetry, often considered a lost art, has many benefits which David Whitley outlines in his Poetry and Memory project. These are that the memorized poem enhances or enriches the life of the person in some way, that the appreciation of the poem is increased, closely followed by the role of the poem as an emotional resource. We can definitely see some of these impacts in the film. When Timms confesses his struggle in understanding poetry, Hector responds,
"I never understand it, but learn it now, know it now, and you will understand it whenever."
For Hector, the purpose of memorizing poetry, despite not understanding it in the present, conveys his belief that the boys, once men, will have a better chance of understanding it since they will have more life experience. This is indicative of his future self-continuity approach to learning, which refers to the sense of connection between one's present and future self, which is a time warp Hector hopes to achieve through his methods of teaching poetry. And there certainly is merit to it. According to Whitley, 63% of respondents claimed that memorized poems gave them a source of comfort in tough times. With regards to nostalgia, learning poetry by heart was once inscribed into the British curriculum and woven into the fabric of cultural life, but has now declined to the point where knowing and being able to recite poetry is no longer the cultural norm. As a result, there is a distinct nostalgia for a time when people could easily summon lines of verse. The movie does indeed create a nostalgia for this type of lasting and established knowledge. In preparation for this video, I read a very interesting paper which applied a neoliberal reading to the film. Set during Thatcher England, the way in which education is treated as a capitalist endeavor is emblematic of the market-oriented climate of the time. Neoliberalism is defined as a political approach that favors free market capitalism, deregulation, and an overall reduction in government spending. It is an attitude that treats the education system as a means to an end, the end being the production of human capital. According to Monica Bergovic, Irwin's teaching ethics and his approach to history go hand in hand with the changing perspectives on education, supported by the school headmaster, who embraces educational reforms that seeks to adapt systems of education to the new economic climate governed by neoliberal logic that subjects all aspects of life to demands of the market. In the movie, the market can be explained by a two-step process. If the boys get scholarships to Oxbridge, the grammar school gets boosted up on the league table, and the higher up on the league table, the more likely a parent is to send their child to the school. And the more popular the school, the more funding it'll receive from the government.
We're low in the league. I want to see us up there with Manchester Grammar School. Haberdasher asks.
As Bergovic explains, in the 1980s, the Tory government introduced a cluster of educational reforms which opened up the educational system to market forces. The cuts in public funding for education, effected with the aim to satisfy the demands of its users and increase the performance of schools and universities, gradually led to a commodification of education as tuition fees replaced university grants, and educational institutions turned to producing knowledge according to market demands. one of the crucial aspects of educational reforms of 1988 that was meant to provide standardized data about schools and universities to potential students was the introduction of the league tables. The national curriculum was introduced to standardize the content of teaching and produce statistical results which were to be published in the league table. These methods were meant to measure the performance of the educational institutions and provide information about the efficiency of schools and universities to potential users or customers. Schools and universities competed by aiming high in the league table to become more attractive to potential students and their parents, who became one of the major sources of finance after cuts in public funding. Hector's unquantifiable teaching methods therefore act as a threat to the headmaster's neoliberal agenda. If Irwin's teaching methods are symbolic of the neoliberal agenda, then Hector's are symbolic of a socialist approach, since his lessons are a collaboration between himself and the boys. On the other hand, however, one could argue that Hector's teaching methods are not a threat to the neoliberal approach. According to Bregovic, Hector's educational legacy that includes philosophy, literature, performance, and movies, or knowledge of low performativity, becomes delegitimized and threatens to disappear from the educational system because it has no clearly predictable and measurable outcome. Though I agree with this to an extent, we are told that Hector's teaching inspired Posner to become a teacher in the future, which means that, without knowing it, Posner will continue to churn out more students who will enter the workforce and become human capital. And if Posner is anything like Hector as a teacher, he will surely inspire more students to teach, who will then, like Hector and Posner, go on to educate and churn out the future human capital. In this way, Hector's unorthodox and unquantifiable teaching methods do have its anomalous uses for the neoliberal agenda. And there is also the case of subjunctive history, as I mentioned earlier when discussing Dakin's essay, which encompasses the teaching styles of both Hector and Irwin. If it weren't for Hector's hands-on methods of teaching the subjunctive, Dakin may not have had such a nuanced understanding of turning points, which may have resulted in his rejection from Oxbridge. Another interesting thing mentioned in Bregovic's essay is Kaliniko's opinion that the students are also victims of neoliberal logic. Bregovic quotes Foucault, who claims that education molds the students according to the demands of the society by operating on two principles. One is the function of exclusion, and the other is the function of inclusion. The students are first excluded from a certain society, Oxbridge, only to be reintegrated into the society after they have incorporated the values of that society. Throughout the film, we see the boys learn to play the game. They learn to think critically as Oxbridge students do, and despite their initial rejection and skepticism of Irwin's journalistic approach, they learn to use it to their advantage. As to whether the boys are victims of the neoliberal agenda, as Kaliniko suggests, considering that they are very much aware of the game they have to play, I would slightly disagree with his statement. One of the boys, Rudge, who is an overlooked pupil trying for a rugby scholarship, bears discussion when discussing whether the boys are victims of the neoliberal agenda. From the offset, Rudge has had a less than enthused approach to the Oxbridge application, with the ability to see it for what it is. When the headmaster interviews Irwin about his role, he mentions how bright all of the boys are, except for Rudge.
Might get into Loughborough in a bad year. Otherwise, all bright. But
Right off the bat, Rudge is presented as a character one should not pay too much attention to. Unlike the other boys, Rudge declined his offer from Oxford because it was never something he truly wanted, unlike the other boys. Rudge is not a victim of the neoliberal agenda. Whilst all the other boys eased into their acceptance of the pomp and fuss and frills and the pretense, Rudge was always less than willing to put on a facade for the Dons, stating, if they like me, and they want to take me, then take me because I'm dull and ordinary. Going back to Foucault's idea that education molds the students according to the demands of the society by excluding the students, first from a certain society, only to be reintegrated into the society after they have incorporated the values of that society. Rudge not only rejects the notion of fitting in by not pretending to be someone he isn't, but he rejects the notion completely by rejecting his offer from Oxford. By refusing to mold himself to fit the bourgeois standards acceptable for Oxford, he, in turn, rejects the whole neoliberal attitude towards education. At the end of the film, we find out that he goes on to become a builder. Unlike the other boys who go on to live middle-class lives, Rudge ends up where he begins, working class, which unlike the other boys, he has never had an issue with. Like Irwin, Rudge also lies about having gone to Oxford, but unlike Irwin, he does it to court sexual favors with the women he shows around the houses he builds. All in all, Rudge manages to escape the neoliberal agenda by realizing that he is much happier with the life he has, as well as seeing nothing attractive or favorable in living a polished lie. To end this video, I'd like to end on a very touching personal anecdote that Bennett mentions in the introduction to the play, which perfectly sums up the value of education he works towards conveying in the play. I have generally done well in examinations and not been intimidated by them. Back in 1984, when I took my O-levels, I was made fun of by the other boys in my class because on the morning of the first paper I turned up in a suit. 10 years or so later, I took my finals at Oxford and dressed up again. This time nobody laughed, as we were all dressed up in the suit and gown that were obligatory for the occasion. This was, I suppose, the last and most significant examination in my life. Thank you for watching the video, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into your favorite movies. And let me know what you think of this series, as well as what films you'd like me to unpack in the Academia series.